We're so glad that you've joined us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Our hope is that you will be both encouraged and challenged in your relationship with Jesus. Be blessed as you listen to this week's message.
We're going to jump into the rest of and kind of wrap up this series that we have been in over the last month called DNA. And I think I'm going to wrap it up this week, even though I had mentioned at the beginning of the series that like what this series was is it's just been on my heart. We've had the, we just wanted to talk about what some of the things that made us, made Anchor Chapel Anchor. So before we even launched the church, I had like a list. There's like a list in my notes of like 18 or 20 things that we always wanted our church to be about and to be known for. And we're just hitting in this series a couple of the major things. Last week, we talked about hard work. The week before, Sam preached about not being a people that are easily offended. And then the first week, what did we talk about the first week? Is anybody paying attention? Does anybody remember? I've been so busy, I don't know if I've been paying attention, but it was something great. And you just go and watch YouTube or the podcast. It was incredible. But today we're going to wrap up probably with what was it? Reaching, always reaching. That's right, that we are a church that is always reaching people. So today we're going to talk about one of the things that I think has clearly marked our church. Anytime that you see a church that starts from the ground up and you see the kind of people that are drawn to this church, this quality is alive in the people. And it's something that as the church ages and as we move to a permanent facility, there would be the temptation or the threat for this thing to die off. But I believe that it has always been with us and that this is one of the central things that need to stay not only with our church, but I believe that the church that Jesus left in the care of his followers was always called to be a brave church. Always called to be a church that would sacrifice much for the eternal, that would be willing to give it all, that would be willing to go to the unknown, that would be willing to do what we've been afraid to do and trust God whenever it seems like the waves and the wind are overwhelming for us. So I hope that today's message about bravery, the spirit of bravery, I hope it will challenge you personally, but I also want you to know this is who we are as a church. Now there's a difference between bravery and something else called stupidity. So I remember years ago whenever Brooke and I were dating, I just remember just feeling this jealousy, like anytime that I thought she was like talking with another guy, and like you're just working the relationship out, trying to figure out how much you can trust this person. And we had the town that we came from, there was this old train bridge that we used to go and just like climb up, 8 or 10 flights of stairs until you were a good 50, 60 feet above the water, above the river that passed there. And we would just kind of go across, and there was, graffiti, and, people would go and do ungodly things, but we were always Christians, so we would fast and pray while we were there. But we climb up there with like the college group one night, and not like, it wasn't like official college group, like with the college pastors there. It was just like us, we just got together and we decided we're going to climb the train bridge tonight. So we get up there, we climb all these flights of stairs, and it's dark. It's probably 10:30 at night or so. And the way that the train bridge was set up is there was a bridge crossing, and then on the outside of the rails where you could walk, there was a structure of the bridge in large beams that would just kind of crisscross back and forth. Well, on the way up, I'm just like so overwhelmed with I'm in love with Brooke. I think that she's in love with me, and I'm just like I'm so excited. Well, there happened to be a guy in the ministry at the time whose name was Brian, I believe. And I remember as we walk up, we're seeing graffiti all over the bridge, and I remember seeing in some of the graffiti something caught my eye, and it said Brooke loves Brian. And this is like, whenever you're young and you like think the world revolves around you and there's nobody else named Brooke or Brian or like you think like it's you, like you're like the Truman Show, right? Like the whole world, like you're in this bubble, everybody's watching you, you're the only thing that matters. Like these thoughts of jealousy just begin to overwhelm me. So we're on this train bridge, and I begin to think, I've got to win her back. I've got to like do something to gain her attention. So while we're all up there, 10:30 at night on this bridge, 60 feet above the water, I decide to climb over the rail. I climb over the rail of this bridge and I start walking zigzag across all of the support beams on this bridge. So I'm out there, and of course it worked. All the attention's on, don't do it, you're crazy. And Brooke's like, don't go there, you're why in the world? And I'm just like, I don't care at all. I have all the fear in the world, right? But like, I don't care because the attention's on me. Now, I would say in that moment, you might look at that and think that was a kind of brave thing to do, but I would say there's a difference between bravery and stupidity, because bravery requires wisdom. Stupidity does not. But in that situation, I think that we have a tendency to think that bravery means that we won't do anything that seems foolish, which when you're following Jesus, it looks a lot different than when you're walking on the supports of a bridge. That might have been a really stupid thing for me to do, but there are going to be times whenever you're following Jesus that people will say to you, why would you give your life to that thing? Why would you commit yourself only to one person for the rest of your life? Why would you give your money to that place, to that church? Why would you do any of the things that the apostles wrote about in the New Testament, these radical lives? Why would we live a radical life following Jesus? It takes bravery. And here's the thing I want us to understand when I talk about bravery today, and the story we're going to look at in Scripture, is that bravery requires fear. Bravery has to have fear. It's like what courage is. Courage is not just not feeling anything and doing these superhero actions, but it's in the face of fear, you do the thing that you're meant to do, that you're called to do. And I think that, if you feel no fear, it might be stupidity. But whenever just because there's fear doesn't mean you don't do it. And when we're called to live brave lives, we're called to do it in the face of fear. Looking at the unknown, not having all the answers. So I want to look at three things today as I preach just about the spirit of bravery. And these are the three ingredients for bravery. And as I'm looking in one of my favorite stories, and one of the stories I feel like I relate to the most in Scripture, we're going to look at the call of Moses. So we're going to look back in the Old Testament, the book of Exodus chapter 3, and we're going to look at how God called Moses and got his attention. The first thing that we're going to look at, ingredients for bravery. First thing, if you're taking notes, here's the first thing you need for bravery: a holy moment. A holy moment. A holy moment will force us to do things that we thought we could never do. Now, I remember a couple of years ago, Preston and I were called to be photographers for this event that a ministry here in town was doing. And they were doing this event where they were sponsoring adoption, and the idea behind this is you pay a certain amount of money, and then you rappel down the Capital One building downtown. And this building is the tallest building other than the state capitol there. It's the tallest one that you could rappel down. So we were there 2 days photographing people going over the edge of this building. And Preston is scared of heights, so he wouldn't take pictures of the people going over the edge. He would take pictures like from the safety of like just the cityscape. But I'd be hanging over the edge and taking pictures, and I was loving it. It was so fun. But like while I was there, they said, and they mentioned, hey, if it costs a lot of money to do this usually, but since you guys are our photographers, you can rappel down the side of the building if you like. And I decided, of course, I'm not going to pass up this opportunity. This is here. And Preston's like, I'll take pictures, so thank you, Preston, for this photo. Now I'm like, but I'm there and I'm thinking in the moment, I may never get this moment again. This moment may pass, and to this time in my life, a couple years later, I haven't had that moment again. But in the moments when you have an opportunity to be brave, there are certain things that can push you over the edge, that can force you or cause you to take a step over the edge when you never would do it in a regular, in your normal life, in your day-to-day life. And I think that those moments, those holy moments, if you will, they have the potential to make you do something or to help you to see the benefit of doing that you would never see on your own. And I think that we need to be people who take advantage of and are hungry for those holy moments. The moments when the Spirit of God challenges us. If you're following Jesus and you feel comfortable, you ain't doing it right. Like whenever you follow Christ, like it's going to be moment after moment of brave thing, of thing that you never saw yourself doing. When you've got to speak to that coworker and the Spirit of God urges you and says he's ready. Speak to him and tell him about the hope of Jesus. Or the moment when you don't feel like restoring relationship with your wife or that family member and God speaks to you to do the humble thing. Like these are just relational things. There might be a time when God challenges you or calls you, like go ahead and pursue that job in the other state, or go ahead and pursue that calling of ministry on your life. For us, man, our life has been, if you know us, it's been step after step of things that were brave but looked ridiculous. I remember my dad, and he'd be okay with telling this story now, but whenever we decided to make the move to plant a church, or actually no, just to go into ministry, I was working with my dad outside, and my dad's just like a real practical guy. I mean, if you know him, you know he's a godly man. He loves Jesus, but he said, Josh, how in the world are you going to support your family? Like people in ministry don't make a lot of money unless you know how to do it right. But it's like people in ministry don't know how to make, like they don't make money. They're like, how are you going to do this? Like it doesn't make any sense. You're on this path that seems to be leading towards you being responsible financially. And now you're going to do this. You're going to take your new wife and you're going to jump into ministry. Like it doesn't make any sense. And I just remember feeling, man, if my dad doesn't get it, am I wrong here? Like he's somebody who I respected. But it was these holy moments that put something in me, that put a conviction in me that he didn't have that experience. Yeah. And it was okay. Yeah. And years later, after seeing us move in ministry, he came to me and he apologized and he said, I remember that conversation that we had. And I want you to know I was wrong. And I see the call of God on your life and I'm so proud of you. And it just took some time. Because when God speaks something to you and you have a holy moment, when God challenges you to something bravery, like other people might not get it. It might not make sense. And that's part of what makes it brave is that you're doing something that seems foolish to everybody else. It won't make sense to do something brave. And I think that, man, unmistakable encounters with God, they birth bravery in us. Let's look at the one that Moses had, Exodus 3, verse 1 through 15. Set up the story a little bit. If you don't know who Moses is he's known as the patriarch of one of the patriarchs of the faith. Is that he's a man who wrote a lot of the Old Testament. The first five books of the Bible is just like, it's his recollection of those things, those historical events. And you just see like the law is established with Moses. God's Spirit was with him heavily. He set the people of Israel free from slavery. And this is really where this story begins. He's a Jew. He's born to a Jewish family who knew, because at the time, like these babies they were killing the Jewish sons. And so to help Moses to survive, they put him in a basket and put him in the Nile River. And an Egyptian woman finds him, raises him in the palace. He's royalty as he grows up. But then he sees the suffering of God's people. He sees his own people, the Israelites, being abused as slaves. And that passion burns within him so much that he ends up killing an Egyptian soldier, someone who is enforcing slavery on people. And he kills this guy. And then he ends up running for his life, running away from this, seemingly running from the thing that God had set him up for. So at this point in his life, he's been running. So let's look at that in chapter 1 of Exodus 3. One day, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, who had taken him back and just kind of given him a job, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire in the middle of a bush. I love that there's this cartoon called The Prince of Egypt that DreamWorks did, that like every time I see this scene, I like start crying. I'm just like, this is so beautiful. It's powerful. If you haven't seen it, you've just got to go see it. Like, I know it seems so wimpy right now, but it's amazing. It's a powerful moment. Verse 3, this is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called out to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. I love Moses' response. Here I am. Moses replied, do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you're standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And when Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. A couple of observations about this that are so powerful to me. Moses grows up in royalty. He's like somebody. He matters. He's got prestige. He's got power. And even though he would never really sit on the throne as the king, he would always have it made. But Moses, at this time in his life, is tending the flock of sheep. And I wonder, are you okay going from the palace to being a shepherd again? Are you okay if you feel like you're, like this is kind of how this happens sometimes, that you feel like you are on your way, that you're headed towards royalty, things are working, everything is clicking, God's favors on your life, or this job is just working out, then all of a sudden it seems like the bottom falls out from you. It seems like, what happened? What did I do? Why are you mad at me? And you can get so frustrated, but Moses was right where he needed to be. Are you okay with leaving to palace to faithfully tend the sheep for a moment? This is where he needed to be. And maybe today you're frustrated with the exact season you need to be in. Maybe you need to tend the sheep for a while. Because what it did is it humbled him. It put his heart in a position where he was hungry again. He would have never seen the burning bush if he wasn't in the wilderness. And some of us hate the wilderness, but in the palace, no bushes are burning. In the palace, everything's perfect. There's no need, there's no desperation, there's no hunger. So sometimes we've got to allow God to get us out of what that moment or that season of perfection so that we can be hungry again. Moses knew he was made for something, but in this moment, he just felt like he had just kind of given up on life. He was running from everything. He had just murdered someone. He's like, I'll never be able to show my face there again. I blew it. But God was, again, he was about to deposit again the dream that he knew he was made for. Moses is running for his life. But in that burning bush moment, in this moment in the presence of God, I think it reveals a couple things. That God is always doing something very unique, very special. And I think that we need to find ourselves, we need to be drawn to or attracted to moments where environments where God can move. And I think that we had a worship night last Thursday night at the building, and it was just kind of an impromptu thing. An email went out, and people came out, and it was one of the most powerful moments. I would say that was a holy moment. And there are holy moments that happen all around us all the time. And God is trying to get our attention, but how many burning bushes do you see that you just walk past? Because it says that God didn't speak until Moses drew near. He was passing by it. If he would have kept on going and seen that thing and observed it and thought, wow, that's something unique, but never approached it, God wouldn't have spoken to him. And I think that there's a responsibility on our side to approach the bush, to approach what God is doing, to lean in to what God is doing. And when we lean into the presence of God, I believe that that's when he speaks. I've got just kind of a way different experience than anybody else whenever I go to Disney or any other theme parks. I'm not good with rides. I get sick. I just really can't handle them. So what I end up doing is I end up with my camera around my neck, and I find the perfect moment to capture everybody else's thrill ride. So everybody else is having fun, and they're coming down the roller coaster, and everybody's having the time of their life while I'm just taking pictures, and I'm just looking at it. Now, if I was on that roller coaster, I'd probably be throwing up on everyone who's on the roller coaster, which wouldn't be great for anybody. But the experience on the side is much different than the experience inside. And I think that one of the problems in your life, maybe if you don't find that you have holy moment experiences, maybe it's because you're observing Jesus and what he's doing instead of following Jesus and what he's doing. There's a big difference. Because like as a Christian, we learn how to watch it. We learn how to scroll on our Instagram feed and we see all the things that God is doing. But if God's not doing something in your life, you end up feeling empty. You end up feeling like, why does that happen to everybody else? And this doubt creeps in, and maybe I'm not doing something right. Maybe it's as simple as just approach the bush. Just lean in. You don't have to have all the things figured out. You don't have to know all the things about God. You're going to find out in a second, Moses did not have a great, deep knowledge of God, but God still had a plan for his life. He's just asking us, just lean in. Because in these holy moments encourage us and strengthen us towards bravery. I remember whenever Brooke and I were we had just been married and we were starting to just really lean in together as a couple. I remember God was speaking to us as we would go to church services, or maybe we would go to conferences as we were married a couple years, and God just began to really awaken some things in us. But one of those moments, this might have even been before we were married, that I remember there was an album that a band called Switchfoot put out. Any Switchfoot listeners in the house? Yes, indeed. So back in the day, they put out an album called The Beautiful Letdown. And on this album, they had a couple different songs. They had a song called Meant to Live and a song called Dare You to Move. And like, neither one of these songs say Jesus in them. But God used these songs to challenge us out of our comfort. And it's so wild to like think about this, that God can use anything as a burning bush. But like in those, I just remember these iconic moments in our life where God was challenging us, where he was pulling something out of us, when he would light a bush on fire to get our attention. And you have to learn to lean into those holy moments. It might be, whenever I was growing up, it was summer camps. I remember these holy moments when God would speak in those moments. And if you make much of those moments, you're going back to your job tomorrow morning, and it's not going to look like a Sunday morning experience. You might go to your anchor group or a worship night, and it's going to be a powerful moment, but then you have to sleep with your husband or wife, and they ain't no holy moment happening there because you're all mad at each other, whatever's going on. Your kids are still messing on themselves and whatever. Like, you've got, real life's going to hit you after these holy moments. But those holy moments do something, they last much longer than that moment. They can awaken something in you when you learn to lean in to those moments. And I love Moses' response, "Here I am." I think that phrase, "here I am," is supposed to be the normal response of Jesus followers. Not later, maybe, if I have time. But here I am. Right now in this moment, here I am. Now, what's with the shoes? This is so interesting. There's so much in this story that I don't really have time to unpack all of it. But God says, this is holy ground. Take off your shoes. Why? What would that mean? Well, it means a couple different things. There's a lot of major religions across the world. In worship, the priest will remove their shoes. And it's a sign of humility. It's a sign of I'm taking off the thing that protects me from everything else and gives me any kind of dignity. Because remember, people didn't have shoes like we have now. There was a symbolism to it, that when you would remove your shoes, it was a sign of humility before God. But the other thing, I saw a rabbi had written an article about this, and one of the cool things that he mentioned was that shoes collect bits of the world. And as you walk, you're collecting the travel of other people, and you're collecting the dirt and the stuff that makes up the outside world. And what I think God is trying to speak to us is that we've got to be okay in those holy moments to get away from and be willing to shed all the things of the world, to be willing to shed all the things that don't really belong in the presence of God and have his purposes at the utmost importance. And when we respond to those holy moments that way, I think it pushes us towards bravery. So that's the first thing, is that ingredients for bravery is, number one, it's a holy moment. The second ingredient for bravery is a burden. Now, when I say a burden, this is like, if you didn't grow up in church, you might be like, I don't even know, I have no context for this word, because it's a Bible word. But it's a word that basically means a conviction. Something that you cannot leave you. It's a feeling, it's a passion, it's something in you that just will not go away. It's a burden you have for something. You can have a burden for a person. You can have a burden for a people or for a ministry or for something. You can have a desire. It's something that causes you to pray and to seek God. So like that, you have a burden. I think whenever you have a burden, it's the second ingredient that pushes us towards bravery. What is that for us, man? One of the things that is a burden for me is to see people discover their gifts and begin to move and walk in those gifts. That's one of the reasons that we started a church, is we wanted to create an environment where people who weren't believed in were believed in and given opportunities to shine and to grow. And I'm okay. I love that so much that I would be okay with building an environment in a culture where I didn't do anything on the stage and people got to shine and people got to use those gifts and those ministries. That's something that I'm so excited about that possibility. And you see this in the story. As you continue to look at it, you see this in the story, because Moses had a burden for the people of God. He had a burden for Israel. And the way that he tried to fix it was by killing someone. Now Moses, with the strength of his own conviction, he was able to free maybe 1-2 people. But with the power of the Holy Spirit, and when you follow the leading of the Spirit, that burden can save a nation. Yeah. See, in Moses' strength, he could only save a couple. But in the strength of God, he saved a nation. And when you do it God's way, there's a difference to the approach. So let's look at verse 7, how it happens. It says, then the Lord told him, burning bush moment, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites and Hittites and Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Whew. Look, now the cry of the people of Israel has reached me. I love that perspective. Sometimes you feel like your cry hasn't reached God, but your cry reaches the ear of God. So much so that he takes action. And he says, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people out of Egypt. What's amazing about this burden that Moses had is that God had it too. Yeah. And I can promise you, no matter the burden that you have, if it's a God burden, God feels it more than you do. So when you pray and when you have a passion about something, you can be guaranteed and you know for sure that God is going to move, because if you care about somebody, God cares all the more. God cares more than you could possibly care. More than the burden or the conviction that's in you. God cares about that more than you ever could. So God is already moving, and he wants to move in that way, and he wants to rescue his people. But the crazy thing is, he says, I've heard the cries, and I have come down, now go. What I love about this perspective is that God, yes, he comes down and he answers prayers, and he chooses to use you to be the answer. Yeah. He chooses to use you to do it. And that burden must force us to bravery. That burden can't force us to complain or to be critical about somebody who's not fixing the problem that you care about. The burden is meant to cause you to go, not to put that burden on somebody else. Like, yes, the burden for the lost is one we should all bear. But there are certain things, there are certain avenues of deliverance that you may be called to, that it is your responsibility. God is calling you to be brave there. And every time that God delivers a people, he chooses to use someone who he has delivered. Do you think about Moses? Moses is a man who's running from his past. He's just murdered someone. He feels like God is done with him. But God, in this moment, is restoring him. This is what he's doing. He's giving purpose back to him. He's taking the thing that was robbed from him, not robbed from some outside force necessarily. Moses did it. Moses screwed up. But God is still restoring that purpose to him. And when God delivers us, he delivers us so that we can deliver others. So that we can be a part of that answer. So the burden, that's the second thing, the burden pushes us towards bravery. And the last thing that we're going to look at, the last ingredient for bravery is a promise. Is a promise. When God speaks a promise to you, I think the possibility contained in a God-sized promise is enough to make you do anything. When you believe what God speaks to you, you can do anything. There is nothing that can stop you. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. When you hear the voice of God speak because you lean in to a holy moment, man, there's nothing that can stand against you. There's nothing that would stop you. And this is what we're called to do. We're called to chase God into these holy moments, to hear the voice of God give those promises. I think when you combine that holy moment, that burden, and God's voice, it's almost like you don't have a choice. You just follow the voice of God. Years ago, I was the first time that we were volunteers in a youth camp. We were helping at this student camp, and we're in this cabin, and they're having this incredible worship night. And a pastor is preaching there, who's actually from here in Baton Rouge. And he's preaching there, and God's Spirit just begins to move in a unique way. And there were some things in me that I felt that God may have been awakening, or there was a lot of doubt, but there were some things that I thought maybe God wanted to do with me. Well, that night, the pastor was ministering, and I'm just one of the chaperones. I'm like, I've aged out of student ministry. And he calls me out, and he points to me. And he says, you, with the blonde tips, because at that time, it's like, you, stand up. So I stand, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, he's surely got to be talking about somebody else. But I stand up, and he begins to speak prophetically over me. about the gifts and the call of God on my life that I had hoped was real, that I had felt that the Spirit of God had put in me, but he began to speak some things, all of which have come true. He began to speak some things about me going into ministry, about becoming a youth pastor, about all these very specific. It wasn't just like this random, like, you will, like sometimes in church you could just like get this real random thing, and like it was so specific. And God used that moment. It was a promise that God spoke to both of us that pushed us to brave moves. And when you lean into these moments, man, God begins to speak some things to you. But the funny thing about a promise is that in between the promise and its completion is always pain. There's always pain between the promise and the completion. I love the promise. The promise is amazing. I am special. You're right. I've got some things in me. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to be amazing. And you begin to chase those things, and all of a sudden it doesn't look anything like the promise. And you're still looking ahead, but you're like, why does it feel so different? Why does it hurt so much right now? I don't like this. You didn't tell me anything about this. I was talking with one of our church overseers the other day, Pastor Josh Melanson. He spoke here a few months ago, and he spoke this over me, and he just said this is so powerful, and I think this is something for us as a church to remember. He says, God always gives us the promise before he reveals the problems. I thought that was so true, that God will give you a promise, but then along the way you're like, oh, like that promise doesn't happen unless we go through all of this, unless we experience these things, unless we fix these problems, unless I get these things right in my life, unless I mend these relationships, unless I pursue God harder than I ever have before. It's just not really there. I think God never really lays out all of the details contained in the journey. If he did, most of us probably would never start. And I think I was talking to someone about this the other day, and they were saying, it's always fascinating about whenever I think about the journey of you guys starting the church, and I remember saying, like, if I knew what I knew now, we probably wouldn't have done it. But the Spirit of God keeps some things from us so that we can begin to walk, so that we can begin to take those steps, so that we can move in bravery. If you had all the answers, you'd live such a sheltered life. If you knew all the pain, if you knew all what it would take, you'd never do it. I'm going to ask the band to come up as I read this last bit of the story and we get ready to wrap it up today. In verse 11, Moses does what many of us do. It says, Moses protested to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people out of Egypt?" God answered, "I will be with you." And this is the key thing that's always spoken to me for years. He says, "This is the sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain." But Moses protested, "If I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they'll ask me, 'What's his name?' What should I tell them?" God replies to Moses, "I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'Yahweh, the God of our ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to be remembered for all generations." I think like Moses, we all have our own insecurities. We all have things and reasons that we question God. And as you see later in the next chapter, Moses has another excuse. He's like, "Well, God, I have a stuttering problem." So he's like just coming up with all of his insecurities. He's giving it all to God as excuses. "God, I can't really do this." The first thing he says, though, is, "I don't know you. I don't even know your name. I'm not equipped to go and talk to your people." Like these people, they know you. They know your history. And even though I'm one of them, I'm not really in the in crowd. I grew up in a different environment. I don't know who you are. I don't know how to relate you to them, how to relay who you are. Maybe the insecurity that you have, or the reason that you're not bravely following him, is because you feel like, I don't really know enough. I don't really know God like other godly people know him. He's not asking you to know it all. He's not asking you to have everything together, to have every question answered. He's asking you just to trust him. And he gives promises to those of us who are just hungry, who just need something new, who are just willing to be obedient. You don't have to have all of it. I've always had a spiritual insecurity. Every time I get around other pastors, other leaders, just people who pray good, I always feel like I don't know what to say. Like I don't really fit in here. I don't really blend in. But for some reason, God's chosen to use me. And I hope that today, whatever your insecurity is, you stop using it as an excuse and say, Jesus, I will follow you to the unknown, no matter what. I trust you. I love the quote from Lord of the Rings. Frodo tells Sam, he says, whenever they're leaving the Shire, he says, it's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. And I think that there's an absence of knowledge that is always part of brave movements. That anytime you do something brave, there's going to be an uncertainty. But the promise of God is what you hold on to, not the certainty of what you see now. It's the promise of what Jesus is giving you. And I love that there's this proof. And Moses is challenged by God in verse 10, or is it 10? It's verse 12. God says, this is the sign. Moses is like, how do I even know that you are who you are? How do I know that I'm not just having this weird moment in the wilderness? God says, here's how you're going to know. You're going to come back after you do all the things I've told you to do, and you're going to worship me at this mountain. See, obedience precedes confirmation. And Moses is challenged by God to do all the things first. There's going to be a lot of things in your life that you think God might be asking you to do. Do them. Yeah. Follow the Spirit of God. Confirmation comes later. And what I love about this is Moses doesn't know who God is, but Moses says, tell them this, I am who I am. In that name, in that phrase, there's contained all kinds of knowledge about God. And one of the things that it means is, it means I am here. I am real. I am present. I am powerful. You can count on me. There's security. So even when you don't feel it, He is I am. He is I am, so you don't have to be. He is what you don't have to be. You don't have to worry about your own strength, your own confidence. He is who you need Him to be. Whenever they came to arrest Jesus, Jesus speaks to them. They ask Him, are you Jesus, the Son of God? Are you Jesus of Nazareth? They ask Him whenever Judas comes to betray Him, and He says, I am. When He says, I am, they all fall back. The power in the phrase, in the name, I am. Everybody fell back, and Jesus still submitted to being arrested. Whatever is facing you today, it is no match for the name of God. Whenever God meets you in a holy moment, and He gives you a promise, just follow it. Trust it. Trust the Spirit of God, because He's calling us to do brave things. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel. If you'd like to support the ministry of Anchor Chapel, you can easily do so on our website at anchorchapel.com. You can also follow us on social media at Anchor Chapel. Be blessed, and we'll see you next week.